Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Hello, here are the old jokes. A man had never filed an insurance claim until one day his garage burned down, so he called his agent and told him to send the money. The agent said, "Sorry, sir, we don't send money. We just replaced the article exactly as it was." And the guy said, "Oh, well, in that case, cancel the policy on my wife." Elsewhere, a lady goes into the butcher shop and says, "Butcher, give me 5 pounds of pork chops and make them lean." Butcher says, "To the right or to the left?" Now this. A factory worker got caught in a huge wheel and was whirled around and around over and over until he was finally thrown clear. A fellow worker came running over and cried, "Speak to me, Jim, speak to me." Jim looked at him and said, "Why should I? I just passed you 300 times, you didn't even say hello." I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Good day, here's what's humorous. A guy comes home late one payday with only $20. His wife says, "$20? He says, "Don't worry, honey, I spent the rest on something for the house." She says, "Oh, that's different. What did you buy?" He says, "A round of drinks." Elsewhere, a lady walked into a butcher shop and said, "Butcher, how much is your ground beef?" Butcher said, $1.98 a pound. The lady goes, $1.98? Across the street, it's only $1.10. Butcher says, "Well, why don't you buy it there?" Lady says, "Because he's out of it." And the butcher says, "Look, lady, when I'm out of it, you can have it for a quarter." Now this. Two old friends meet on the street, and one of them says, "What's the matter? You look depressed." And the other guy says, "Depressed? I had a big fight with my wife, and she swore that she's not going to talk to me for a month." The other guy says, "And that's got you down? You should be happy." He says, "What happy? Today's the last day." I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Hello, here's what's funny. A 50-year-old woman walked into a bar with a canary on her shoulder and said, "Any man who correctly guesses the way to this canary can come home with me for the night." 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, and nobody says anything. Finally, an inebriated fellow at the end of the bar turns to her and says, "Lady, that canary weighs 6,427 pounds. She looked at him and said, "Close enough, let's go." Now this. A fellow was shipwrecked on an island inhabited by cannibals. They tie him up in the middle of the village, and every morning they cut his arm, take a cup of blood, and the king drinks it. This goes on for 5 days until finally the guy calls the king over and says, "Look, buddy, I don't mind if you kill me, I don't mind if you eat me, but I'm tired of getting stuck for the drinks." I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Hello, here's what's funny. A young boy is 7 years old and he's never spoken a word, and his family has come to accept the fact that he's mute. Then one day they're all sitting at the dinner table and suddenly the kid says, "Pass the ketchup." Everyone's elated, they can't believe it. His father turns to him and says, "Son, this is wonderful, you can talk, but why haven't you spoken before this?" And the kid says, "Well, Dad, up to now everything's been okay." Now this. A politician was campaigning on an Indian reservation, and during his speech he promised new schools and colleges, and all the Indians stood up and said, "Hoya, Hoya." Then he promised more jobs and money, and again they went, "Hoya." This went on all afternoon. Finally, he was taking a tour of the reservation, and he came across a pasture, and he wanted to know if it was safe to inspect it. So he asked his guide, and the guide said, "Sure, you can go there, just don't step in the Hoya." I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Hello, here are some old jokes. It's World War II. 5 American planes take off to drop leaflets over Berlin, but only 4 come back. Everyone's very upset because they figure that Harry was shot down. 2 weeks later, a single plane is spotted overhead, and it looks like Harry's. Everyone's running outside, and the plane lands, and sure enough, it is Harry. They run up to him, they pat him on the back, and the captain says, "Harry, what happened? All the other planes dropped their leaflets, got right back." Harry says, "Dropped them. I was sticking them under the doors." Now this. 2 inebriated fellows were staggering down the street, not going anywhere, and they happen to wander into the zoo. They're standing in front of the lion's cage when all of a sudden the lion lets out a giant roar. One drunk says, "Come on, let's get out of here." Second one says, "Nah, go ahead if you want. I'm going to stay for the movie." I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Hello, here are the jokes. A young fella had gone out to Hollywood to try to make it as an actor, and then one day he calls his father back home and says, "Dad, I got my first role in a play. I play the part of a man who's been married for 25 years, and the father says, that's wonderful, son, just keep at it, and one of these days you'll get a speaking part. Now this. Joe Brown was lying on his deathbed, and just before he passed away, he told his wife that if she kissed another man, he'd turn over in his grave. Well, a few years later, his wife passed away, and St. Peter met her at the pearly gates and asked if there was anybody she wanted to see. She said, yes, I want to see my husband, Joe Brown. St. Peter said, well, ma'am, we have a lot of Joe Browns up here. Can you be more specific? She said, yes. Just before he died, he said if I kissed another man, he'd turn over in his grave. St. Peter said, oh, you want to see twirling Joe Brown? I'm Ralph Harris.
Old Joke Update, brought to you by the XYZ Company. Here is Ralph Harris.
Good day. Here's what's humorous. A rich guy is in love with a beautiful girl and offers to buy her anything she wants, but all she wants is a solid gold pocket knife. He doesn't understand it, but he buys it for her anyway. He brings it to her house. She thanks him and puts it in a big trunk filled to the brim with solid gold pocket knives. He says, why? She says, well, I'm not always going to be so young and so desirable, but 30 years from now, can you imagine what a Boy Scout will be willing to do for one of these? Now this. A spaceship lands right in the middle of the garment district in New York, and two tailors are peeking out of the door of their shop to see if there's any sign of life. All of a sudden, the hatch opens, and out comes this strange creature with 3 heads, 6 arms, and 14 legs. One of the tailors turns to the other in horror and says, what'll we do? And the other says, quick, hide the free alteration sign. I'm Ralph Harris.